and welcome to the next video in our series for Women's History Month, sponsored by VanillaSoft. We're talking with some amazing female sales leaders, and today I am so excited. We are joined by Bernadette McClelland, who is the CEO of Three Red Folders, and I'm especially excited because Bernadette is joining us from the future, at least for those of us who are stateside over here, because Bernadette, you actually are in Australia. So thank you for being our first international participant. So are you, where are you? Are you on the Perth side or are you on the Sydney side?
We're on the Melbourne side, which is south of Sydney. So East Coast. Same as you, East Coast.
East, I love it. So thank you so much for joining us and doing this bright and early in the morning. Starting off these things as we start everyone, tell us how you got into sales.
Well, you know, there's a couple of different stories on it. It's what kind of sales. I suppose when I first, I think I was only 18 and I left New Zealand and I came across to Australia on a working holiday, and I was in Queensland and didn't have a job and saw this ad in the local paper, and it was selling stationery sets door to door for multiple sclerosis and to help the kids with MS. And so I've just taken off and started to door knock and having chats with people, and I just sold and sold and sold. And back then, now this is like way back, I was making a roughly $7 an hour, and that was a lot of money for me back then as an 18-year-old. So anyway, that was a little, I guess, introduction. But from an enterprise sales perspective, I worked for a company as it was Xerox, actually, here in Melbourne. I worked as a order entry clerk. I went into the credit department. I was sales secretary. I became sales coordinator. And I saw all these salespeople. As my role as sales coordinator, I was doing all the commissions for the salespeople. And it was in the 80s, and there was a lot of money being made in the 80s. And I would look at the amount of money that these guys are making, and then I would look at the caliber of guy who was making it. And I thought, you know what? If he can do that, so can I. And they had a traineeship open up, and 3 times I applied for that position, and 3 times they knocked me back. And each time they knocked me back, they said I didn't have what it took, that I wasn't aggressive enough, and that I was too nice. Needless to say, they eventually gave in to my persistence, and I left that company a number of years later as one of the senior sales executives. So now I'm helping people in the sales space to become even more high performing than they currently are. So that's my journey.
I think that's fascinating. You had to apply 3 times before they relented. That's fantastic. So after you go through that arduous application process, you fight to even get the trainee program. Was there a moment or a memory that you've got of once you were actually in the role where you went, yes, this was the right thing for me, and this is what I'm supposed to be doing?
Yes and no. And so I'll say no. There were times that I really wondered if I'd put my ladder against the right wall. And the reason for that is that I was a single mum at the time, and financially it was difficult for me. In saying that, on the flip side, it was probably the best thing that I could have done, because it gave me the ability to make some decent money, but also to, I guess, row my own boat. So to have that autonomy, to have the opportunity, I think sales is the biggest personal development journey somebody can go on. You are forever pushing your own boundaries. You're forever stepping up and facing all the different fears. And, you know, you may say that, you know, it's fear of rejection, but in a lot of cases, it's not fear of rejection when you've got to pick up the phone. It's overcoming a whole heap of other psychological stuff as well that, you know, we probably won't go into now. But that's why I believe that psychology is the baseline for high performance in the sales field. So, yeah, in answer to your question, was there something that kind of triggered the fact that I thought that this was the right thing for me? probably nothing specific. It was just a continual evolution of my own growth.
I think that's completely fair. And I could not agree with you more on psychology being that underpinning. I call it a performance mindset. You're hearing that phrase pop up a lot more. Like it's fascinating how people are from my perspective, more suddenly becoming aware that, oh, it's not just the systems and everything else. It's you've got to get things right in your own head, because people can pick up on everything. It's really interesting. So you're in this crucible, you're figuring out these things. What were some of like the biggest obstacles that you had to face, and how did you overcome them?
And there were a few. Being one of the only females in a very alpha male domain was difficult at the time, because I'm talking 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there were no females in that space, and the females that were in that space were extremely butch, to put it nicely. The role models, there were no role models there, and you had human resources is probably the only place you could go, but HR had their own silo that they ran. So there wasn't much in the way of support for females in the sales space. Now it's different. And now we've got, resources like what you're doing now, like the wonderful group of, women sales pros that I'm part of that have been my support mechanism for the past 10 years, doing what I'm doing. So we need each other, but we also need to realize that sales is a brilliant profession. There's, the ability for us as females to tap into what we are very good at, that's innately given to us as our qualities, which is that empathy, which is that listening, which is the care factor. So if I kind of wind back and say that was probably the hardest part for me, was not having females that I could kind of lean in on.
So in today's world, obviously it's a lot easier, but there's still, especially if you're in a company that is still predominantly male, maybe there aren't a lot of women on the team, if any. What advice would you have for somebody who's trying to find those role models? Maybe if there aren't any, they're obviously present in their life.
They're out there, and I think now there's you can go anywhere. There's so many different women's leadership groups, women in sales groups. Start your own if that's something that is key to you and really important to your growth. Start your own. It's an opportunity now for us to kind of to step up and be that leader in the space that we're in, to also stretch yourself and become an expert in the field that you're in. Begin to look at thought leadership and look at how you can package your knowledge and your experience to help other people in the organization or your clients.
That's really good advice. So what's one skill specifically that you can think of that you wish you'd mastered earlier?
A skill, great question. And my journey. So after leaving corporate, and this will just put it into perspective for you, after leaving corporate and having a family business, and then coming back into the corporate world, I came back via the coaching channel. So I kind of use that word coaching lightly because I think it's a dime a dozen out there at the moment. But I was the Asia Pacific coach for Anthony Robbins. I got my diploma in coaching, so I've kind of really dug deep into the real, bones of what coaching is about, over and above deal coaching. And so what I learned from that I bring into the sales space is the ability to really understand the power of questions. And if I go back to my role as a salesperson when I was in sales, if I had the ability to identify different types of questions outside of your either your spin selling or your methodology or whatever you're using, but coming at questions from a psychological perspective, so that you really are asking questions whereby the buyer or the prospect is doing the heavy lifting for you and giving you all the information that you need. At the end of a sales call, if your buyer or prospect can walk away and say, I don't even know what they do, but man, they know everything that I do. That's perfect. And that comes through the ability to coach. And that's why when I work with my clients, it's really about helping salespeople become coaches, because it's all about questions. It's all about psychology. It's all about language. It's also all about, if I knew as a salesperson when I was back on the tools, so to speak, if I understood that I had beliefs around money, and I was able to identify what those beliefs were, man, I would have made so much more money than I did. So it's a whole heap of stuff that comes at that level that changes the game.
That's a lot to unpack in there. So it's fascinating. The idea of all the questions, and that's something I'm hearing more and more in even on the training side of things. People try to figure out how to teach people to be better question askers. So it's exciting to hear that coming up. Thinking back, were there ever points where you felt like you were specifically undervalued or underestimated? And how did you respond to that?
Yes. Yes, definitely. And and I probably didn't respond as effectively as I could have. So keeping in mind, and this is all part of this journey that I've personally been on, and everyone has their own journey. Emotional intelligence is crucial. And once again, the ability to be able to articulate what it is you want, the outcomes that you want, the purpose behind the outcomes that you want, and be able to be brave enough to back yourself. And if there's one thing that I wish that, in hindsight, that I could go back and change, it would be to back myself more.
I love that. Okay, so what would you say to somebody who is considering a career in sales?
Well, once again, there's different types of sales, different markets, different industries, different roles. Look, I would say, look at what I do. I would say go for it, but no buts. Go for it, and be prepared to work hard, because you've got to really want to be in sales to make a success of sales. So what I mean by that is, if you're just going into sales because it's a job, because you may get a company car, because it sounds really cool and you don't have to be in the office all the time, that's the wrong reason. So you've got to want to go into sales because, there's a question that I ask my sales guys when I'm working with my clients. And I'll ask them to put their hands up, those of you that want to be successful. And everybody's hand naturally goes up. The second question is, hands up those of you that want to be successful in selling, because that's a totally different question. And if they'll put their hand up, and I'll ask them to go get their diary for me. Show me your calendar for next week. It's empty. Show me your CRM updates. Haven't done them. So you've got to do what you don't want to do in sales. And that's where I believe that whole personal leadership journey kind of comes into full effect.
Oh, that's so true. And you're reminding me how much work I've got to do when we get off of this call. So kind of keep along that same theme. What advice would you have for women, especially if they feel like they're hitting that glass ceiling or are unable to progress their career further?
There's more than one way to skin a cat. And, there's always a way. And look at the environment we're in at the moment. Yes, everybody's hitting their own glass ceiling today. and how we go about things, how we think about things. What do we look at that's absolutely crucial that we need to address about our own development? Get some feedback from other people. Source feedback, take feedback on board, and find mentors. And find mentors that are males as well as females, so that you get a mix. And just almost stick to your lane and put your head down and just kind of become tone deaf. Don't listen to a lot of the noise that goes on. Get very clear on what your end goal is. And, I've just not long walked the Camino in Spain and Portugal. And yes, I might have done, 131 kilometers or whatever, and that sounds great. But I did just under 200,000 steps. And it's those little steps that you take when you're crying and you just don't want to go any further. It's just all about the steps.
That's such a beautiful analogy. And lastly, how do you think we can best support all women in sales so we can continue to achieve great things together?
Doing what we're doing. Just continuing to do what we do. And, it's how did we support women who are voting? How are we supporting women in domestic violence? How are we supporting women, in slavery? We're making a noise and we are taking action. We're listening and we're sharing. And I think we just have to keep doing that.
I could not agree more. Well, Bernadette, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so much fun. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you so much for all the insight and the wisdom. And this has just been absolutely delightful. And thank you, viewers and listeners, for tuning in again to another conversation with some amazing women in sales for Women's History Month. And tune in next time.
Thanks, Ashley.